Howdy folks, welcome back to the shop. What we've got here that I'm working on today is a 2014 Tesla Model S. This actually started life as a Model S60, and actually just the other day I put a 75 kilowatt hour battery into it. The original battery had some issues, and ultimately the best solution to that was to put another battery into it, and in this case it got a bit of an upgrade. I wish I would have done a video on that process, but when the car first showed up here, I wasn't totally sure on whether the customer was actually going to go forward with a repair, and so I didn't film any of the disassembly process on the old battery, and by the time it came to installing the new battery, I figured there probably wasn't much point in trying to make a video out of it, since I'd basically be missing the first half of the repair. But don't worry, we'll probably get another one in here sometime for a pack replacement. And honestly, it's a pretty simple process. But anyways, the other thing that this car needs addressed is it needs a rotor coolant delete on the large drive unit. So that's what we're going to do here right now is we're going to pull the drive unit out, pull off the old manifold, and install a rotor coolant delete manifold to eliminate any possible coolant intrusion issues. Alrighty, first things first, we need to go ahead and do our disconnect process. So right now the car is on. And we're actually going to go ahead and, so now we need to enter service mode. So we just press and hold right here, release, and then we get a text box that pops up, and we'll type in service. Hit OK, and we will enter service mode. So now we're in service mode. Again, probably not totally necessary for what we're going to do here, but now we need to go into not service mode, but regular service on the screen here, and we're actually going to go into tow mode, and that's going to lock the rear wheels into neutral. And then we'll go ahead to safety and hit power off. And then I'm also going to go ahead and open the frunk. Alrighty, so now we've got the frunk open there. To get to our 12-volt battery and our high voltage disconnect, they're under these panels here. So this one up top just kind of pops loose. Can get that out of there. And then this one right here actually has a little rubber bumper that the hood hits. So we'll just unscrew that. And then this one also just pops right out of place. So up here just below the windshield, we've got our cabin air cleaner. We'll go ahead and pull that out. And then we need a clip tool to pull a couple clips out right here. So there's one clip right there. And then we have another clip that hides under this rubber flap here. And then we can kind of pull this up out of the way a little bit. And there's a couple screws on either. There's one screw on either side of our filter housing here. We just need to go ahead and get those out real quick. Bingo. And then that just pulls right out of there. And then we're going to go ahead and disconnect the negative terminal on the 12-volt battery, which, can you guys see that? I guess not. Let me move you. All right, so that right there is the negative terminal for the 12-volt battery. So on that, we're just going to go ahead and disconnect it, loosen that off a little bit. Pull that off of there and tuck it out of the way where it's not going to touch the battery. And then this right here that has the orange flag on it is our high voltage disconnect. So I'm actually going to pop that loose off of here. It's kind of clipped on. And then it just has this little red tab that pulls out. And now our interlock is loose. And I always just put this on the dash so that it can be seen and I know that the car is disconnected. Alrighty, as you saw there, we got our tires off. Now we got to get this bottom cover out of the way so that we can actually get to, pulling the motor out of the car. So first things first, I'm going to pull a couple clips off on either side here. And now we've got a bunch of screws holding everything in. So we'll go ahead and take all those out. Alrighty, and now that I've got all those fasteners out, I'm actually going to take the shear plates up here off first before I try and pull the cover down, because with this newer style battery, it's a pretty tight clearance in there, and you can't really get the cover off without taking the shear plates off as well. So. Alrighty, now the only thing holding this in is the fact that these ribs are clipped in, and that's why I actually leave them attached to the piece, so that it kind of makes it nice to remove and install, because you can just clip it in place and then it'll stay. So there's that off. Alrighty, now that we're under here, you can see we're a little bit oily on the motor. That'll probably be our axle seals leaking. So I might go ahead and swap those out for the guy. And our next steps in terms of actually getting ready to pull the drive unit out is we're going to need to drain the coolant out of it. I'll clamp the lines off so that we lose as little coolant from the car as possible, and then we won't have to purge a ton of air out of it. So let's start with that. Alrighty, I've got just a container here sitting on my transmission jack to catch our coolant. And we're going to go ahead and disconnect this coolant line first. Sometimes this can be a little bit messy because it drains right on top of this cross member on the subframe. Couldn't find the plug I was looking for, so we'll just shove a towel in there just to try and keep it from dripping too much. Over here on this side, I'm actually just going to remove the whole nipple because it has to come off when we pull the drive unit out of the subframe anyways. On this side, I do have a plug that I can shove in there. That'll do it. Then I'm actually going to kind of unclamp this coolant line and rotate it so it's out of our way here. And then I'll clamp it back into place just so it can't come off. There we go. Next thing to do while we're under here is there's some connectors on the subframe. These do vary depending on the time that the Model S was built. On the later ones, they actually shoved the connectors back here on the kind of right side of the car. But on these earlier ones, it's 4 connectors on the back side of the subframe here. And they all just pop loose, except for one of them that has a little lock on it. So we have to pop that little lock down, little red tab. There we go. Tab is loose. And now that one should come undone. It's a little bit hard to get your hands in here since it's a little bit of a tight space, but it's doable. And then what I'm going to do is the the car side of the connectors, I'm just going to kind of shove back here under this cover so they don't get squished. Alrighty, those are good. Alrighty, and then on this side, this is actually where our high voltage cables connect to the inverter, and then this is our data connector for the inverter. This is actually part of the harness that's attached to the subframe, but we have to unplug it in order to get the orange cover off here. Okay. And then that's actually kind of a captive bolt, and it doesn't come all the way out. There's that off. And then we know that we're disconnected, but it's always a good idea to double check for voltage. So we'll go ahead and do that. And of course, 0 volts. So now we'll go ahead and unbolt our DC plus and minus. We're not actually going to be able to pull the cables out yet, but we want to get them unbolted from the drive unit. Or rather from the inverter, so that we can pull them out when we're ready. Alright, I've brought the car back down to a working height here because we have to take our brake caliper off as well as our parking brake caliper. For those of you that don't know, on all Teslas actually, they don't actually have any kind of parking lock pawl mechanism in the gearboxes. They solely rely on brakes. So on the old Model S, they actually have a separate caliper for park. And then once you get to the newer cars, they have it all integrated into one caliper where it has an electronic parking brake and the hydraulic all in one. But on these old cars, it's actually 2 separate calipers. So first thing, we're gonna go ahead and pull off our regular brake caliper here. It's just a couple of 18mm bolts. Pretty standard, nothing special about it. Just like any other car. Get those broke loose, and then I'll get my power ratchet off on it. All right, and then I'm just gonna kind of press the caliper back and forth a little bit to push the pads in so it slides off easy. And then I'm just going to zip tie the caliper up here out of the way to the coil spring. I brought my light over so we can actually see what we're doing. Now we'll go ahead and remove the parking brake caliper. We're not going to unplug it. We're actually going to just leave it plugged in because the connectors on these are a real pain, and a lot of the time they don't like to go back together again so nicely. The harness that it plugs into is actually part of the subframe harness, so when we drop the subframe, it'll all come down with it. We really just need to unbolt the caliper so that we can get it out of the way to get the bolt out of the strut, because otherwise the connector on the caliper is in the way of getting the bolt out. So that's really our primary reason for wanting to get that off. That's also why we put the car into tow mode, is so that that's not clamped down. So let's go ahead and get that off. There we go, there's that off. Then we can kind of just set this up here where it'll be out of the way. And then I'll go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. So now our next step here is that we've got to get ready to drop the subframe out of the car. So I'm going to go ahead and get some wooden blocks set up on my table here. And then we're going to drop the subframe down onto those. So we're just perfectly right on our blocks. Now we're gonna go ahead and unbolt the subframe. So there's just 4 bolts on it, 1 on each corner essentially, and they're all just a 21 millimeter hex. Okay, so the subframe is unbolted all the way around. Our next thing that we need to do, which is pretty important, is before we try and lift the car away from the subframe, if you can see right back there, let me get a light on it. And if I can get the camera to focus, that little tab on the back of the battery overhangs below the subframe. So we actually need to push the subframe back that way a little bit so that it clears that tab and doesn't bust it off of the battery. I wouldn't say that it's critical that that tab doesn't get broken off, but obviously you don't want to break stuff off of your battery, but it is just there for the bottom cover to attach to. All right, we should be clear of that now, so now we're good to go up a little bit with the car, and then we can start disconnecting everything else that we need to get off. So now I'm just going to gently, just a little bit, lift the car a little bit there. And as you can see, we're lifting away. We didn't break our tab off the battery. And now we can gain access to the top of the subframe, which is where our high voltage cables go into the drive unit. And we've got a ground and a couple zip ties up here on the cable, or cables, and just a couple other little things to disconnect. So we'll go ahead and start on that. First things first, this is our bolt that the strut is attached to the knuckle with. So we just want to push that through. And actually I got it just perfect on that one where I was able to push it through by hand. Sometimes might have to get a hammer and a punch or something to kind of shove that through. But that one was easy. So now I'll go ahead and do the same thing on the other side as well. Okay, so I've got the camera kind of shoved back here in the wheel well. But what we've got here are our 2 high voltage cables that go to the drive unit. These, since we unbolted them before, we should be able to just kind of wiggle them loose. There's nothing that actually holds them in other than just the bolts themselves. Sometimes these glands can get corroded into the inverter cover, which can cause big problems, but these ones are fine. So we'll just pull that out. There we go, second cable undone. And I'm just kind of shoving these up on top of the drive unit so that they're not in our way. Normally I'd actually do this one with a long extension, but the way I have the camera set up, it's kind of in the way. So I've got limited access. There we go. Now I got the handle of my ratchet wedged in here somehow. There we go. Alrighty, I did go back in there and snip those 2 zip ties off the cables, but now we've got everything disconnected. Our high voltage cables, our ground. Of course, we did all the stuff on the bottom of the subframe before we dropped it. The struts are both, all the bolts are out. So now we're good to go ahead and lift the car up away from the subframe, and then we can work on getting the motor out of the subframe itself. Okay, so we've got the whole subframe assembly out of the car. Now we need to actually get the drive unit out of the subframe. So really there's nothing else that's really connected on it other than the speed sensor over here that's plugged in. So I'll just unplug that real quick. And then we just have to get the axles out of it. So the way that I always do that is I actually disconnect the upper links on the outside closest to the knuckle, because those are just straight bolt in. That doesn't affect any alignment stuff. So we'll unbolt those and then we'll pop the axles out of the gearbox. Okay, so we've got our upper links unbolted, so now our hubs on the ends are free, and now we can actually pop the axles out. There's attachments that you can get for slide hammers and stuff to pop those loose. It's a little bit hard to get access with everything on the subframe in the way. I find that the easiest way to do it is to get a good pry bar. I'll stick it in there just like so, and then I'll just give it a nice hit with a hammer. In a couple spots, and there you go. So our axle just popped free right there. We'll get the one on the other side here, same deal. And that one I think we also popped loose. Yep. So now I'll just pull that out the rest of the way. Make sure we don't get caught on our speed sensor wiring or anything here. There we go. And those are both out. So now we're actually to the point where we can get ready to pull the drive unit out. It's still bolted in, but we need to get it rigged up to actually pick it up. So I just have a chain here. I do have a lift plate that I have cut out that I've been meaning to finish building. It needs some spacers and stuff added onto it. But I have this chain set up for lifting these. My little zip ties on here denote the actual distance, the number of links that I want to set the chain up at. If I set it up just the right way with the forklift, I can actually pick it up with just the chains. But I'll also put a strap around this end because that makes it way easier to keep it level and everything, and it'll be a little bit more stable when we actually go to put the mill. Okay, so our motor's all chained and strapped onto the forklift. Let's go ahead and take out our motor mounting bolts. Alrighty, everything's unbolted on our motor. Our straps and everything are tight. We should be good to go up. There we go. Now I'll just move it back and bring it down to a working level. Okay, so now we can actually go ahead and pull our manifold off. So first things first, I'll just pull the speed sensor out. Which this one was a little bit wet, but not too bad. This motor can get away with just a coolant delete. and not a full rebuild. We also have to take off this tube on top here. I call it the flyover tube. There we go. And now we can actually remove the manifold itself. Whoops. Drop that in the coolant there. And then we should be able to just pop this loose. Until it's all the way off. Just like so. Alrighty, so now that we got the manifold off, we'll go ahead and I'm just gonna pull that little O-ring out of there. And then I'm gonna clean up the old silicone gasket maker around the flange here. So I'm all out of my typical billet coolant delete manifolds. So I've actually got a different setup here. This is just a stock coolant manifold, just like the one we just pulled off the motor. But it's had the tube removed, the seal taken out, and then this cap is pressed in. And it does functionally the same purpose as, you know, the billet ones that I would normally use. But I was out of stock on those, and this is actually a really great economical solution if you've got the kind of equipment to actually be able to press these in. So anyways, yeah, that's that. Whenever I do modify these, I actually I grind down the part number on the end there, and then I just stamp in Rotor Coolant Delete. That way, if the car is ever sold, or, you know, someone ever goes to try and check the speed sensor or something on it, hopefully they should be able to see that and identify that it's had the rotor coolant system deleted. So anyways, we'll go ahead and prep to get that thing installed. Okay, we've got our sealing surfaces prepped both on the motor side here as well as on our delete manifold. Hit them with some acetone and stuff. So now we'll take our gasket maker and we'll just put a nice thin little bead around here. And I always like to add a little bead down here. Not all motors from the factory came with gasket maker installed down here, but I have had situations where the O-rings are kind of smushed flat, or the tolerance for the O-ring groove isn't great, and then it just doesn't seal properly without silicone. So I always just add a little bit on there for the sake of it. Now we'll take our coolant delete manifold and stick it right on here. And we'll go ahead and reuse the original bolts. I don't think I mentioned it, but sometimes you do want to go in and clean out the holes to make sure that there's no silicone in the ends of them, where you end up with the bolts bottoming out and then you strip out the threads. It's never a fun time, so I did do that as well off camera. And then I always like to tighten these down by hand just in case. That's installed. Now we can put our flyover tube back on. I'm going to go ahead and wipe this motor down a little bit because it's pretty filthy, and then we'll also, might as well while we're here, put some new gearbox oil in it, and we'll replace those gearbox seals since they're clearly leaking. Alrighty, we're clean enough for what we're trying to accomplish there. Now we can go ahead and pull our old seal out. Not too difficult. Grab our new seal. There we go. We're installed, flush all the way around. I'll go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Now we'll go ahead and change out our gearbox oil. That was pretty tight. This motor does have a little over 100,000 miles on it and presumably original oil in it. Yeah, it's pretty dark. A little bit of metal on the plug, but nothing that's outside of the realm of what I would expect to see. Alrighty, that's all drained. We'll go ahead and put our plug back in. And we'll pull out our fill level plug. Although our motor's at a little bit of an angle, so our fill level on this is going to be a little bit inaccurate. So I'll probably just have to kind of measure it out. Alrighty, we're good to go, ready to put this thing back in the subframe. Alrighty, the motor's reinstalled in the subframe here. Go ahead and get all of our straps and stuff off of here. Go ahead and get our axles back into place. So we'll start on this side. Get the splines lined up. I think we're in there. There's one side. And there's the other. Next we'll go ahead and get our suspension in. I always find that it seems easiest to put on this link first. So what I'll do is I'll kind of get it positioned. I'll lift up on the hub knuckle, and then I'll just push that bolt in. This one's got a nut on the other side. And then we'll push this one down into place, get that bolt in, and then we'll go ahead and tighten both of those up. Bingo. Single here. Push up. This one. Alrighty, we're now fully assembled and ready to reinstall back in the car. Alrighty, the subframe is positioned under the car here, so we're going to go ahead and lower the car into place. Might have to tweak it a little bit to get the positioning right, but I think I've got it pretty close as it is. I'm probably just going to time lapse through all this because I want to get it done, and it's basically just the reverse of the installation process, so there's not a lot to show. Let's get going. Alrighty, so we've got the whole subframe and everything mounted in there. Now we just have to connect everything back up, and then we should be pretty much good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and put the bolts back in our high voltage cables here. Boom. Got a connector, and that's clicked into place. Now we'll get our coolant lines hooked up and the rest of our subframe connectors. All right, here's our first coolant line. There we go. Now we'll put the other one on before we take the clamp off. Alrighty, and now we're on to our second coolant line. Loosen that clamp up so we can rotate the hose around to the right position. Push that in there, and then I just got to grab the bolt for it. Boom, now we can take both of our clamps off. Alrighty, we'll get all of our connectors back on for our subframe. So these, of course, we tucked back there. Okie dokie, so the install of the drive unit and subframe assembly itself is complete. All we got to do now is just put the bottom cover back on and the shear plates and get the wheels on it, and then just purge a little bit of air out of the cooling system, top it up, and we should be good to go. Alrighty, we've got everything installed. I even put the tires on, although I didn't actually film that. Now all that's left to do is power the car back up. So I've got our disconnect here. I'll go ahead and stick that down here. Oops, I got it upside down. There we go. So there's that. And then we'll connect our 12-volt battery, and we should hear the car power up. Contactors clicked, we're good to go. Alrighty, I went ahead and topped up the coolant reservoir with some fresh G48. We'll just go through a little purge cycle with the car. If we can make that go away. Coolant air purge. Oh, we gotta unlock the gateway, which is right turn signal on with brake pedal depressed. You can see it's unlocking, and now it's unlocked. We're gonna have to close out and reopen. Oh, we gotta be in park, so we have to go out of tow mode. There we go. Now we should be able to do coolant air purge, and successful. Should take about 15 minutes. It'll just run all the pumps at a higher speed to try and purge all the air out of the system. Alrighty, well, I just took the car for a quick test drive, and everything's all good. Drives great. coolant, all of the air seems to be purged out of it. So I think we're good to go. All I got to do is just button up a couple things under the hood here, and then it's a job done. Alrighty, well, coolant delete install is complete on this car. And of course, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I also did a battery pack install on this one. Anyways, that's gonna be it for this video. If you like seeing stuff like this, feel free to hit the subscribe button and maybe the like button too. And stay tuned for more repair videos in the future. Thanks for watching.